Vampires were real, the terrifying disease that created Dracula. When we think of the vampire, we think of the aristocrat in the cape. We think of Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, smooth, seductive, and supernatural. We imagine a creature of pure evil that chooses to hunt in the night. But if you strip away the Hollywood glamour and dig into the graves of 18th century Eastern Europe, you do not find monsters. You find tragedy. You find victims. The history of the vampire is not a history of magic. It is a history of medicine, or rather, the lack of it. It is a story about how humans react when they are faced with diseases they cannot understand, turning their sick neighbors into monsters. To explain the inexplicable dot, to understand the vampire, we must first act as pathologists. We must look at the specific traits that define the creature and match them against the medical textbooks of the time. The symptoms are iconic: sensitivity to sunlight, pale skin, receding gums that make teeth look longer, strange behavior, and a biological need for blood. For centuries, these were signs of a curse. Today, we know them by their clinical names: Porphyria, Rabies, and pellagra. Let us begin with the most striking physical attribute of the vampire: the inability to walk in the sun. In the folklore, sunlight burns the vampire to ash. In reality, there is a group of rare genetic disorders known as porphyria. Porphyries are diseases resulting from a buildup of natural chemicals that produce porphyrin in your body. Porphyrins are essential for the function of hemoglobin, the protein in your red blood cells that carries oxygen in the most severe forms of this disease, specifically congenital erythropoietic porphyria. The sufferer experiences extreme photosensitivity. This is not just a mild sunburn. Exposure to sunlight can cause the skin to blister, crack, and boil. Over time, this repeated damage creates terrible scarring and disfigurement. The skin becomes pale and tight as it heals. To avoid this agonizing pain, sufferers in the pre-modern world would have naturally become nocturnal, only venturing out after the sun had set. But the resemblance to the Nosferatu legend goes deeper. Porphyry can cause the gums to recede and tighten. When the gums pull back, the teeth appear significantly larger and more prominent, giving the appearance of fangs or animalistic features. Furthermore, the urine of people suffering from certain types of porphyria can turn a dark, reddish-purple color. To a superstitious peasant in the 1700s, seeing a person with fangs who hides from the sun and urinates something that looks like blood, the conclusion was obvious: they must be drinking blood to sustain themselves. There is even a theory regarding garlic. Vampires are famously repelled by it. Medically, the sulfur content in garlic can induce an attack for porphyria sufferers, causing severe pain. If a vampire recoiled from a clove of garlic, it wasn't because of its holy properties, but because the smell triggered a physical reaction in their hypersensitive body. While porphyria explains the physical appearance, it does not fully explain the behavior. The vampire is an aggressive hunter, a beast that bites. For this, we must look to one of the oldest and most terrifying viruses known to mankind: rabies, during the Great Vampire Epidemic in Eastern Europe between 1720 and 1760. Rabies was rampant in the wild dog and wolf populations. A rabies infection in a human targets the central nervous system. It fundamentally changes behavior. As the virus progresses, the patient becomes agitated, aggressive, and delirious. They may hallucinate and lash out physically. The most specific link between rabies and vampires is hydrophobia, or the fear of water. Rabies causes painful spasms in the throat muscles, making swallowing impossible. Eventually, even the sight or sound of water triggers these agonizing spasms. In folklore, vampires cannot cross running water and are burned by holy water. If a priest threw holy water on a rabid man, the man would convulse and scream in pain. To the observer, this looked like the reaction of a demon. To the doctor, it is the reaction of a dying patient. Furthermore, rabies can cause hypersensitivity to light and strong smells. Again, garlic and mirrors. The legend that a vampire has no reflection might stem from the fact that a rabid person cannot look at a mirror without triggering a spasm, or they react violently to their own hallucinated reflection. And of course, rabies is spread by biting. A man bitten by a wolf becomes possessed by the wolf spirit, acting like a beast, biting others, and spreading the curse. The connection to bats is also biological. Vampire bats can carry rabies, bridging the gap between the animal and the human monster god. Beyond these specific diseases, there is the phenomenon of the wasting disease. In New England, in the late 1800s, long after the European scares, there was the famous case of Mercy Brown. Entire families were dying, one by one, of tuberculosis, then called consumption. Consumption is a horrific way to die. The victim becomes pale, gaunt, and coughs up blood. As the body wastes away, the blood at the corners of the mouth makes them look like they have been feeding. When one family member died, and then another sickened, the community believed the first victim was draining the life from the survivors from beyond the grave. This led to the grisly practice of exhuming the bodies. The villagers would dig up the deceased relatives to check for signs of vampirism. This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the misunderstanding of death itself, in the past. The average person knew very little about the science of decomposition. When a body is buried, it does not immediately turn into a skeleton. If the coffin is airtight and the ground is cold, decomposition slows down. Bacteria inside the gut begin to break down the internal organs, releasing gases. This gas bloats the body. A corpse that looked thin at the time of death might look plump and well-fed a week later. When dug up, the pressure of these gases pushes blood-tinged fluid up from the lungs and out of the mouth and nose. This is called purge fluid. Imagine the scene. A villager digs up his neighbor who died a week ago. He opens the coffin. The corpse looks fatter than when it was buried. It has a ruddy complexion. And most damning of all, there is fresh blood around the mouth. The villager screams. He is alive. He has been drinking blood. He is fat with our blood. In reality, it is just gas and rot. But in their panic, they would drive a stake through the chest to kill the vampire. This act would puncture the bloated organs, releasing the trapped gas. The body would let out a gruesome sound, a groan, or a scream, as the air escaped. To the villagers, this was the final proof that the vampire was alive and screaming in pain. They would then burn the heart or cut off the head, believing they had saved the village. The tragedy of the vampire myth is that it turned victims into villains. The people accused of being vampires were often the most vulnerable members of society. They were the sick, the disfigured, the eccentric, or the first to die in a plague. Porphyria is hereditary, meaning it runs in families. If a father was accused of being a vampire because of his strange skin, his children might inherit the same condition, confirming to the village that the curse was passing down the bloodline. It was a cycle of fear fueled by ignorance. The vampire was the scapegoat for everything people could not control. Why did the crops fail? The vampire. Why is my child sick? The vampire. Why is the dead man looking at me? The vampire. Dracula, as written by Bram Stoker, was a metaphor for Victorian anxieties about sex and foreign invasion. But the real Dracula, the peasant in the grave, was a metaphor for the human fear of disease. Today, medicine has cast a light into these dark corners. We treat porphyria with heme injections and sun protection. We prevent rabies with vaccines. We cure tuberculosis with antibiotics. The monsters have vanished, replaced by patients. But looking back at the history of the vampire serves as a humbling reminder. It reminds us how easily fear can distort reality. It forces us to ask, what modern monsters are we creating today simply because we do not yet understand the science behind them? The vampire is dead, but the human tendency to demonize the sick and the strange is a ghost that still haunts us. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, learned something new, or simply want to see more content like this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.